I have seen many things in my life, things that made me believe in spirits, curses, and fate. But nothing prepared me for the story of Adisa and Kofi. If you knew them before, you would swear they were cursed to hate each other. But fate has a strange way of playing with human hearts. It all started in our village, deep in the heart of Ghana. Life here was simple, people farmed, children played in the dust, and the elders sat beneath the baobab tree, telling stories of their ancestors. But there was one thing that always disturbed the peace: Adisa and Kofi. They despised each other. Not the playful kind of dislike, no. It was deep, raw hatred, the kind that made people wonder if their souls had clashed in another life. Kofi was the son of the village chief. Strong, intelligent, and stubborn. He was known for his quick tongue and sharper fist. He never backed down from a fight, and many feared his temper. Adisa, on the other hand, was the daughter of the village healer. She was fearless, outspoken, and as stubborn as Kofi. If Kofi was fire, Adisa was the storm that fueled it. Their hatred had started from childhood. No one knew exactly when or why, but they fought over everything: who was faster, who was stronger, who was smarter. When they grew older, it got worse. One day, during a village festival, the elders organized a wrestling match. Men from different clans came to prove their strength. Kofi, of course, was eager to show he was the best. He defeated man after man, his pride swelling like a river in the rainy season. Then Adisa stepped forward. The woman. The men laughed. But those who knew Adisa did not. She had trained under her father, learning not only healing but also the arts of war. Kofi smirked. Go home, Adisa. This is a man's game. Adisa's eyes burned with rage. A real warrior does not fear a challenge, she said. The fight was fierce. Dust filled the air as they clashed. Kofi was strong, but Adisa was quick. For a long time, neither could overpower the other. But in the end, Adisa used a move no one expected. She flipped Kofi over her shoulder and slammed him into the ground. The crowd erupted. Adisa had won. But Kofi did not take it well. His pride was shattered. He stormed away, humiliated. From that day on, their hatred became even worse. Whenever Kofi passed by, Adisa made sure to insult him. Whenever Adisa spoke, Kofi found a way to silence her. They argued at the market, during meetings, even in the presence of elders. The village grew tired of them. One day, you two will destroy each other, an old woman warned. But the true horror began during the rainy season. That year, the rains were heavy. The river swelled, and the ground became soft. One night, while everyone slept, a great disaster struck. The ground beneath the eastern part of the village collapsed, swallowing homes and people into the earth. The screams of the trapped echoed through the darkness. Kofi was among the first to run into the disaster. His father, the chief, was trapped beneath a fallen tree. He pushed, pulled, and screamed for help. Then Adisa appeared. Without a word, she joined him, digging through the mud with her bare hands. They walked together, side by side, until their fingers bled. But the earth was merciless. It swallowed some, spared others. When the sun rose, the village had changed forever. Many lives were lost, including Adisa's father. That morning, for the first time, Kofi and Adisa did not argue. They sat together in silence, staring at the ruins of their village. But hatred does not die in a day. And neither of them knew that fate had just started its game. I have always believed that love and hate are two sides of the same coin. A person who hates you with all their heart is not so different from one who loves you deeply. The only difference is which way the wind of fate turns. And for Kofi and Adisa, that wind had begun to change. The disaster left our village broken. Many homes were gone, families torn apart, and the weight of grief hung over us like a heavy storm cloud. But grief does something strange to people. It either draws them together or pushes them further apart. For Kofi and Adisa, it did both. After that night, something shifted between them. They no longer fought in the marketplace. They no longer insulted each other in passing. But they also never spoke of what happened. It was as if they had made an unspoken agreement. What they had been through was too sacred, too painful, to be turned into another battle. But silence is not the absence of feelings. And beneath that silence, something new had begun to grow. The village needed to rebuild, and everyone had a role to play. Kofi, being the chief's son, was given the responsibility of leading the men in construction. Adisa, as the healer's daughter, took on the task of tending to the injured. But there was a problem. Adisa's father was gone, and she had no one to teach her the deeper knowledge of healing. She knew the basics, but now the village depended on her for much more. One evening, after spending the entire day tending to wounds, she sat outside her hut, exhausted and defeated. Her hands were stained with the blood of those she could not save, and for the first time in her life, she felt powerless. That was when Kofi appeared. She looked up, surprised. They had not spoken in weeks, not since the disaster. "I have something for you," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Without another word, he placed a bundle of scrolls and dried herbs beside her. She frowned. "What is this?" "My mother's healing text," Kofi said. "She studied under your father before she married my father." Adisa's heart skipped a beat. Kofi's mother had died when he was very young, but she had been one of the greatest healers the village had known. She had studied under Adisa's father before becoming the chief's wife. Adisa swallowed hard. "Why are you giving this to me?" Kofi hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Because I owe you." The words sent a strange shiver through Adisa. She wanted to argue, to say she had only done what anyone would have done during the disaster. But the way Kofi looked at her, his eyes heavy with something unspoken, made her hold her tongue. She took the scrolls. "Thank you." For the first time in their lives, there was no sarcasm in her voice. No mockery. Just sincerity. And that was the moment everything began to change. At first, it was small things. When Kofi walked past Adisa in the market, he did not ignore her. When Adisa heard his name, she no longer spat on the ground. Then, slowly, it became more. Kofi began stopping by the healing hut, bringing supplies when he noticed she was running low. Adisa started appearing at the construction site, tending to the injured men who had pushed themselves too hard. At first, the village whispered. Then, they stared. Because this was not the Kofi and Adisa they had known. And yet, even they did not realize what was happening. One evening, as Kofi carried a heavy sack of yams toward his home, he saw Adisa struggling to carry a basket of herbs. Without thinking, he walked over and took the basket from her. Adisa blinked. "I didn't ask for help." Kofi smirked. "And I didn't ask to be beaten at wrestling, but life is unfair." Adisa let out a breath of laughter. A real laugh. And for the first time, Kofi realized how beautiful her smile was. But love is not a sudden storm, it is a slow-growing tree. And for them, it took time. The final shift came during the festival of the harvest. Months had passed since the disaster, and though the village was still healing, the elders decided it was time to bring back joy. That night, there was dancing, music, and laughter. The air was filled with the smell of roasted meat and fresh palm wine. But while the village celebrated, Kofi stood at the edge of the gathering, watching. Then he saw her. Adisa stood beneath the baobab tree, dressed in a deep blue cloth that wrapped around her waist and draped over her shoulder. Her hair, usually tied back, was loose, cascading down her back like a river of night. And for the first time in his life, Kofi felt something he had never felt before. His heart beat faster. His palms felt warm. He did not hate her. He did not even dislike her. He wanted to be near her. Before he could stop himself, he walked over. Adisa turned, surprised. Kofi. He hesitated, then held out his hand. Dance with me. The words surprised them both. Adisa stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she took his hand. As they moved to the rhythm of the drums, something shifted between them. The past, the fights, the anger, the rivalry became nothing more than a shadow. And in that moment, the entire village knew. The storm had finally passed. Of course, their story did not end there. Love is not the absence of struggle. There were still arguments, Adisa was still stubborn, and Kofi was still proud. But the fights became something different. They no longer cut each other like knives. They no longer burned like fire. Instead, they became sparks, small, playful, full of warmth. And when, years later, they stood before the village as husband and wife, no one was surprised. Because some love stories do not begin with kindness. Some love stories are born from fire. And for Kofi and Adisa, that fire burned not to destroy, but to warm them for the rest of their days.